Most of the biodiversity, most of the ecosystems, most of the services that we get from Earth is coming from the ocean. So I think that's important to highlight as well. The fisheries, for instance, most of the workforce inland are women. So if you don't think about the gender issue and the social justice dimension in fisheries, then you won't, so the full supply chain, then you won't be able to change what we mean by sustainability of fisheries. So it's just one specific example. So also consider the human parts.
Situation, right?
Oh yeah, we need to put much more money on the table, but also to structure much more. It's not, you can put as much money as you want if you don't target the right thing, and if you don't structure the funding the right way, then it won't be effective. And this is very important at the moment. We should rethink about how we fund ocean programs.
Welcome to Coeurtisol, the podcast that puts you in the shoes of a member of the European Parliament when you can express yourself on policy proposals that are important to you and on topics that are close to your heart. Today we welcome Alexandre Cornet, who has an impressive biography, but before I develop on this, I really want to say thank you, Alexandre, for being here. Alexandre is a friend for 5 years now, more or less, and he's actually the first guest of the podcast because this episode will not be the first one on the channel, but this is the first one to be recorded. So I really want to say thank you, Alexandre, for your trust.
Sure.
Okay, so going back to your biography, Alexandre, you've specialized on ocean governance with a specific focus on sustainability issues. Over the past 5 years, you worked on multiple ocean policies, such as the establishment of marine protected areas, marine spatial planning, offshore renewable energy, fisheries, maritime safety, and so on. The list is very long. You worked for WWF, for the French Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and you are currently working within the Maritime Directorate of an expert governmental center based on the coast. And on top of all of that, because it's not everything, you sail as a reserve Navy officer in the French Navy. And I caught you actually on time because this autumn, this is an exclusive news, although it will not be exclusive at the moment when this is published. But for now, this is an exclusive news. You are leaving to New York in autumn to support the work of the United Nations on the SDG 14 and on the next UN Ocean Conference in Nice in 2025. I have one word to say so far, wow. But my very first question is simple. How are you feeling today, Alexandre, just before going to New York?
I feel good. It's good to be with you to talk about the ocean, and I hope I can share a bit of knowledge and information with you guys about why it matters.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I'm sure that your expertise and experience is very valuable on these topics. Because obviously you are here today to talk about the sea, but before diving into the secrets of the sea and of the maritime world, I'd like to ask you a question that may not be that simple, although you are an expert and you are a sea lover. But I was very curious to hear from you on that, knowing that the official definition of the sea in most dictionaries is the salty water that covers a large part of the surface of the earth. So if you had to personalize this definition, that is a bit, general, what would you add or change?
Okay, I think it's a good question. Language matters. I think one thing that the definition gets right is that it put it into singular, mentioning water. It's just one ocean, one global ocean. And that connects to everything, but also everyone. I think this has been a huge change in terms of how we talk about the ocean lately. We used to talk about oceans or seas, and more increasingly so, we talk about one ocean. And I think this is an important one. I think they say it's a large body of water, but I think we could say more, like more than 70% of the Earth is actually the ocean. So most of the Earth is actually blue. I think this is important to mention, and maybe most of the biodiversity, most of the ecosystems, most of the services that we get from Earth is coming from the ocean. So I think that's important to highlight as well.
Yeah.
And maybe the last thing is that, really, it connects everyone. It's for humanity, it's something positive, the ocean, that gets us to travel and to connect from one country to another. And there's a social dimension to the ocean that is important as well.
Yeah, and that's super interesting, because actually while preparing this episode, and especially in the context of the World Maritime Day, I had a kind of wake-up call, thinking that first, I don't know much about this topic, although you just said, like, it's such a big part of this important ecosystem. Like, we couldn't do anything basically without sea and ocean in general. And also, I noticed that every time it's covered in the news lately, it's rather, about, let's say, unhappy events or unhappy things, such as the pollution, the climate change, the pushback of migrants. So before we go into this kind of serious topics, first, considering your biography and your life story that seems very, very linked to the sea, I wanted to ask you if you could tell us more about your relationship with the sea, like from where this special link you have with it comes from.
Okay, yeah. Well, I come from a family of seafarers. So my father was sailing, grandfather was sailing. I understood that the previous generations were sailing as well. So that was an important part of my life, being in this community. And I was lucky enough to grow up by the sea as well, in Brittany, in the west of France. So at some point, my family moved really near to the coastline. I started surfing, spending a lot of time at sea. And I think that's where it's all started, this passion. But it took me a while to realize I wanted to dedicate my life to it. It happens when we were in Poland, actually, together at school. I remember I woke up, it was a morning in January, and I realized, I miss the ocean so much. It's not just about surfing or spending holidays, but that's what I want to do with my life. And I ran to my supervisor. I had finalized my first master's thesis, and he agreed that I write a new one dedicated to the ocean, so that I could really have a chance to make a career move after the College of Europe towards the ocean. And then it's all continued.
Wow. Okay, it's funny because I rediscover things while having this podcast episode, because I didn't know that you had this kind of wake up call during our studying time in Poland. In Natolin, we were part of the College Europe in Natolin in Poland. Thank you for sharing all of this more personal details. So I mentioned the negative effects that we hear from when talking about the sea, so pollution, climate change, pushback of migrants. We could also talk about the trade, obviously, as you mentioned it a bit, or the strategic use of the sea. So my question is, there are so many things basically linked to that. If you had to pick one or two things that everybody should be aware of when talking about the sea, what would you pick?
So that's a difficult question. There's so much. There is so much going on. I think with what I've done so far, it was a lot focused on biodiversity. So I think what's going on in the environment, but what's going on with climate is now well known. I think biodiversity still lacks attention, and what's going on with marine ecosystems as well. So that would be one of my first things among the many different topics that the ocean is not doing so great. We might think that it's endless resources and we can't really see what's going on, but it's not really going in the right direction, and that will affect us all ultimately, and now in the very short to medium term. So we should really try to dedicate a bit of attention to that. The other part, I think, which is important, because we can't pick just one topic amongst the many others, but it's just to say that across all the different topics, like the social dimension is super important. You can't expect countries, people, or sectors to change if you don't also consider the human dimension of this. I think this is really a huge turn now over the past years in terms of what we do for sustainability in the different sectors I've engaged with. Thinking about the communities, the workers, the full supply chains. In the fisheries, for instance, most of the workforce inland are women. So if you don't think about the gender issue and the social justice dimension in fisheries, then you won't, so the full supply chain, then you won't be able to change what we mean by sustainability of fisheries. So it's just one specific example. So also consider the human parts in all of these changes.
Yeah, and actually, this is not a question I had because I didn't know, of course, your answers before you would actually be here. But you mentioned the social dimension, human, and the gender part, and then I cannot prevent myself from asking: do you think that women are included enough in this process?
Are major actors in most of the sectors, all of the sectors, as players. So I was mentioning fisheries, for instance, checking the figures, like 40 or 50% of the workforce overall. If you consider the full supply chains of fisheries are women, so you can't do without considering this dimension. But in terms of decision-making process, I think there is still a lot of work to do. I remember, for instance, when working on offshore renewable energy, as you could see, the boards of the energy companies that were engaging in the energy transition at sea were male-dominated heavily. So you can have a look, colleagues in the WFT wrote very interesting reports about women in the offshore energy last year or earlier this year, and that gives an idea. There is much more to do. I think it's changing. The paradox I see is that a lot of people engaging in the transition for the ocean, like in NGOs or in politics, are women. But in terms of who gets the power to make the call, not yet. So there is a lot of work to do, and there is hope. So, for instance, at the International Seabed Authority, the new Secretary General has been elected this week, and she's an oceanographer from Brazil, and this is a huge change. Was regulated by a man for the past 8 years. So things are moving slowly, but yeah.
Amazing. That's good news, and I really didn't know anything about this, so I'm really learning as well. Then I wanted to talk about the nature restoration law. That was a big topic last year. I mean, not last year, but like also this year, until February, when the European Parliament voted this law. Just in a nutshell, the new law sets a target for the EU to restore at least 20% of the EU's land and sea areas by 2030, and all ecosystem in need of restoration by 2050. My first question is, do you think this is enough? And also, in general, not only about this law, do you feel that materially and financially speaking, enough investment is done for the sea?
So I think some people were expecting more than the 20%, but that's the game. What I want to say is just figures for figures. It doesn't really matter. It's the same thing with the marine protected areas targets, which is 30% by 2030. If you just put things on paper and you say this is a restoration area, or this is a protected areas, but there is no management plan, no money, no management committee set up with the people on the ground, then that won't lead anywhere. So the figures for me is just like political impetus, but it's just the very beginning. So David will be in the details afterwards. And we need to see in the long run whether member states really put all the efforts needed so that it actually means something. The other thing is that with restoration, it's a tricky topic. Like what we mean by restoration, there are different approaches to it. The borderline between restoration and maybe, for instance, ecological engineering, so serving purposes for humans, but not so much for nature, can be thin. There are huge debates, and when you talk with the industry, it's not so always such an easy discussion. So we need to be careful when this is being implemented to make sure we're actually doing restoration and not just another form of engineering at sea for humans, but not for the ecosystems.
Agree, and you talk about efforts of the member states. And it's funny because my next question is still related to the nature restoration law. When we look at the results of the votes, and even before looking at the results of the vote, I was at the European Parliament for a different reason on that day, and there was a huge tension, and you could feel a huge momentum about this law. Obviously, the MEPs that were in favor were very mobilized. They had this T-shirt on about the law to promote the law. But you could feel a bit of tension and uncertainty in the air. And indeed, when you look at the votes, so 329 votes in favor, 275 against, and 24 abstention. From your perspective, how would you explain such a tight result? And also, do you think that when there is resistance, so for the 275 against, do you think it's a lack of awareness or a lack of willingness?
Yeah, also a delicate topic for this one. I don't think people lack awareness. I think everyone now knows that we need to do things for nature if we want our society to still thrive in 100 years. I think a lot of people got worried about what we mean with those figures, the 20%. And this is where the human part I was mentioning comes in. You can't just ask people to change, to give up on space, because this is a discussion on space at sea or at land, without helping them figuring out how they're going to change the way they do business, or where they're going to live, or what this means for their daily livelihood. So I think there is also maybe a lack of communication in terms of what this means to restore ecosystems, and to really say, and it's the same for marine protected areas, that it's not about excluding humans from all of these areas and space or from nature, but it's just trying to think about a more sustainable way to be part of those ecosystems that will be restored. I understand if you take farmers, because I think a lot of the resistance was coming from land. If you tell them 20% of land will be restored, and the way they perceive this is that we will exclude 20% of the land from any form of use, that can be very worried if you don't explain what this actually means, and that you can have different ways to practice agriculture, for instance, that could be compatible in some ways. So I think it's important to tell those people we need to restore, but it's also important to reflect about why so much resistance happen. Otherwise, we're going to keep on excluding people from the decision-making processes and having just a two approach, pro against, that is not really helpful. And it's the same for the marine protected areas. It's not about the conservation fortress, you exclude people, but it's really about okay, there is a sensitive ecosystem. There are pressures from human that we can identify. What can we do so that we remove the pressure about those specific ecosystems and those specific species or habitat we want to protect? And that doesn't mean there is no human. It just means we will think about how human can be in this space. And maybe in some areas, things will be so fragile, you can't have humans anymore on tiny parts. But most of it is not. It's rethinking the way you interact with nature.
Yeah, it's very interesting because then it looks like it's more like, as you said, of communication or understanding of what we really want to do with the law. So if you had a lot of power in an ideal world, what kind of policy would you put on the table to improve things? Personally, when I was thinking about this topic, and when I was rushing to prepare the episode, because I didn't know yet that you were moving to New York and that we would meet now, I was thinking of something maybe a bit, I don't know if it's a bit naive, but I was thinking to start, for example, by mandatory classes in the member states, mandatory classes on the protection of the sea and on what is the sea and what it brings and why it's so important. Do you think this would be a good start, or would you have another proposal to make that you would think would have a good and important impact?
No, I think education is important. So now there's a lot of things on what we call ocean literacy. So creating more knowledge and awareness about the issues relating to the ocean, but then making it mandatory. It means that we've not reached the stage yet in our society where people are naturally interested in the topic. So So for me, if we make it mandatory, it means that we still missed a step, and there is like other issues to consider. What we see now, like in the very short term, is like we really lack funding for our transitions towards sustainability with the ocean. There are interesting figures from the UN about that. I think the Sustainable Development Goal 14, the one on the ocean, is the least funded of all. We lacked $3 trillion by 2030 to reach the targets. There is a need for money. This is very short-term and practical things. In Western world, we have money. Not everybody has money, so it's also a collective work. There's just one ocean, so we need a bit of solidarity here, and to think about how we can make sure all countries in the world are able to make it towards sustainability. And this is very practical. And the rest of the thing is not something new. It's just to actually put effort into implementing the targets that we've already set up. The 30% by 2030, the target is there. What we need now is that people are recruited on land, in ministries, in agencies, that they work on management plans, that they engage with stakeholders, and to give it time to produce effects. So we don't need to reinvent the wheel here. We just need to act now.
Okay, it's more moving from words to action. So you would rather say that it's about potentially the EU and the member states investing more?
I think it's both. The EU can do a lot because, we always think beyond borders when we work on ocean issues. For instance, in the UN system, or even beyond the UN system, we have regional seas convention, because it doesn't make sense to tackle, for instance, pollution just within the border of one member state. The water bodies, they move. So the EU can do a lot. They can do a lot with money as well, the funding streams. I think this is super important. We don't realize it, but Horizon Europe or the Maritime Fund for Fisheries and Aquaculture, they're doing a lot. The way the fundings are organized and the targets that they have, we could work more on. Practical example, like the interdisciplinary approach, make sure natural science and social science are work together. For now, when we put such proposal on the table, although this is a political target, then the evaluators, they reject the proposal because it doesn't fit into like the funding stream for natural science. It doesn't really fit in the funding stream for social science. So it gets out of the window, but that's the science that we need now. So the EU should also think about how to better frame the funding for ocean affairs, I think. But it's not just the EU, right? It's one big ocean. The multilateral part is extremely important. At the moment, with all the wars and tensions, it's difficult to bring everyone around the table, but that's the only way forward for the ocean. You don't settle things for more than 70% of the planet with just less than 30 states around the table.
Yeah. So I guess then a policy proposal that could be on the table is to increase the contribution of, in our case, the EU and the member states to improve the situation. Right?
Oh yeah, we need to put much more money on the table, but also to structure much more. It's not, you can put as much money as you want. If you don't target the right thing and if you don't structure the funding the right way, then it won't be effective. And this is very important at the moment. We should rethink about how we fund ocean programs in the EU. And this is based on like all the position I had to deal with fundings for ocean affairs, and I noticed there are like shortcomings in all the fundings streams I've worked with.
And do you think that having a mandatory contribution of the member states, increasing their contribution, could be part of the solution?
Yeah, I think it's tricky again, like the fact that we would force a member state. Also, remember that not all EU member states have a coastline, so that's also something to consider when we talk about the balance at the Council, for instance. Overall, like as the EU, we should increase, and also not every country has the same ability. And this is again like about social justice. Some will be able to do more, some will be able to do less. We need to consider the whole thing. And it might seem a bit like an easy thing to say, but this is the only way forward. And again, like one country, super rich country, can put a lot of money on the table. If it doesn't work with the other one, it won't need all the money. It's just in all ocean space. We will need to work with all the neighbors, and beyond the neighbors, the whole sea basin, and beyond the basin with the rest of the ocean.
But I guess, and this is linked to what you just said, it's also a matter of solidarity, because even for the members that do not necessarily have direct access to the sea stays important for all at the end of the day. So yeah, we are moving towards the moment of the vote for the viewers and listener. I remind you the principle. A policy proposal is on the table and you have to vote for, against, or to abstain, like a member of the European Parliament. Here I will still put the proposal because I thought it was very interesting to hear on your doubts on the mandatory aspect. For example, if it's mandatory to give money, but in my example, it was to give mandatory classes in schools in all member states about the importance of the protection of the sea and of the environment in general. In other areas where I'm more familiar with, it's like the debate around the introduction of quotas. You know, not everyone is happy about that, but you can see that thanks to that, there is a kind of impetus to start doing the work at the end of the day. So indeed, it's not ideal to make it mandatory because, as you said, ideally we should have a society that understands and is ready to do it without this kind of quotas or without having mandatory measures. But the truth is that we are not yet there. So I still suggest to put on the table the following proposal, which is making classes mandatory about the protection of the sea, of the maritime world in general. So making these classes mandatory in all EU member states, at least to be, you know, stronger with the young generation. So you can vote for, against, abstain, explain in the comments, whether on YouTube or on Instagram. I guess for you, it would be kind of in between, as you explained.
I would put amendments to that.
Perfect. So you can put into the comments the amendments you would propose, and yeah, we will read your comments and maybe you will even answer to some of them. So thank you so much, Alexandre, for sharing your experience and your expertise. And I'm starting to speak Franglish again now as we're heading to the end. But before we close the episode, we arrive at the Coeurtisol moment. What is the Coeurtisol moment? It makes me smile because it's my favorite part, I think, in this concept, because it's a way to finish with a positive and light touch that has nothing to do with the topic of the episode. So basically what I'm going to do, first I explain you how it works and then we can do it. You have 3 paper birds on the table. I will ask you to choose one of them. Then I will ask you to pick a number between 1 and 10. I will make the paper bird works like in school. And of course, you choose the color that you prefer. And the color is linked to a number of questions. And then I will ask you the question that was apparently meant to be for you. So, Alexandre, can you tell me which paper bird you would like to pick, first of all?
Okay.
There's no blue, unfortunately.
Yeah, I go for the close green.
Green, okay. Perfect. Now I have to make it work. I prepared them some time ago, and it's the first time I'm using them. So
it looked nice on the table. I thought it was there for decoration.
No, it's part of the episode. So now you have to pick a number between 1 and 10.
5.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And now you can pick a color.
Okay, I'll go for this one then.
Okay. And you have question number 12. What is question number 12? Let's see. Okay. Oh, wow. This is number 12. If you could take a vacation anywhere in the world by yourself, where would you go?
Oh, whoa. Like no limits.
No limits.
Okay. I think I would sail to Patagonia. This is one of the dreams I have. Yeah.
Okay. And do you think this is a dream that will come true, or? after New York?
Maybe one day, not by myself, maybe, but with a crew and on a tall ship. Yeah, I wish I could. Yeah.
Okay, so I wish that to happen to you if it's a dream. It's important to work on our dreams. Thanks again, Alexandre. Thanks for the crash test, because once again, as you know, it was the first episode and it was prepared a bit last minute, so please mind in your feedback. Of course, thanks everyone for watching, and please don't forget also to think before you click, because we are all human beings behind the screen, and I just want to make sure that this space is a space of respect, kindness, benevolence, and constructive exchange. So thank you again, and see you soon on Coeurtisol. Bye bye.
Thanks. Bye bye.